this video, you're not going to see an awful lot of imagery because Paramount can be, shall we say, a little bit litigious when it comes to Star Trek imagery, so there'll be a little bit, but not much. Most of it'll just be the fancy bouncing audio level meter you see in the background. So let's get on with it. This video will probably not make me many friends. On the other hand, there are probably those who will have heard this already and will agree with me. And there are probably some out there who will try their hardest to argue against it. It's a topic I've heard argued already, many times. I've heard arguments from both sides. Let's see if I can add a new-ish slant on the subject, though it's probably just a rehashing of old commentaries and arguments. If you guessed from the title that this is about the universe of Star Trek, congratulations, you are correct, though there's no prize involved with that. Roddenberry's future Utopia. Graceful starships whizzing around the cosmos on a weekly basis, solving mysteries, making both friends and enemies, making enemies into friends, or friends into enemies. But is it truly a utopia? Let's start from the beginning. In September 1966, a new program conceived by Gene Roddenberry, known afterwards as the Great Bird of the Galaxy, aired on NBC. Star Trek had some absolutely fantastic technology, including the beloved and much maligned transporters, which in reality were nothing more than a cost-saving measure because, let's face it, the special effects to land a huge spacecraft on a new planet every week would have been prohibitive. And that starship, what a change from cigar-shaped rockets, some of which actually had wings, or flying saucers. It was, and still is in my opinion, the most gorgeous spaceship to ever grace the screen. I'm an original series fan, by the way. It had a disc-shaped primary hull, with the command bridge at the top center, a cylindrical engineering hull, and two powerful warp nacelles, which generated the warp field which allowed the ship to travel faster than the speed of light, which is technically impossible, which the warp field both did and didn't do, but that's a completely different story and I won't go into it here. Well, some of the stories were just meh. There was one which intrigued me in particular, Bread and Circuses, a title which is derived from the writings of Roman author Juvenal, Book 4 of the Satires. As a Christian and historian, this episode always intrigued me, especially due to the inclusion of Romans, the 20th century, and Christ. Now, Roddenberry, according to legend, despised the interference of the studios in certain aspects of his show, and I gather this episode was one of those which he despised the intervention. Roddenberry, if you weren't aware, was a secular humanist and known for his distaste for subjects such as religion, politics, marriage, etc. Writing Star Trek, he wrote it with an eye to showing that the future exists without any kind of a need for marriage or religion, etc. Now, this kind of showed in his life by his affairs, one of which was with Nichelle Nichols, according to her autobiography. We know about the technology, and we know about the stories, but what kind of a society would the United Federation of Planets be? Let's start off with governance. What kind of government was the United Federation of Planets? Not a whole lot is known about the government, but here's some of what has appeared so far, and I'm going to quote from the Memory Alpha webpage for starters. The United Federation of Planets, abbreviated as UFP and commonly referred to as the Federation, was a supranational interstellar union of multiple planetary constituent political entities under a single central government, founded on the principles of liberty, equality, peace, justice, and progress, with the purpose of furthering the universal rights of all sentient life. Federation members exchange knowledge and resources to facilitate peaceful cooperation, scientific development, space exploration, and mutual defense. All sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Government was structured as a federal constitutional republic, although most of the UFP facilities were located on Earth, including the President's office. By the way, the UFP had a president and a legislature known as the Federation Council. Member planetary systems delegate some of their sovereignty to this president and council. The delegating of some of a system's sovereignty is somewhat scary to me. I translate the word delegating as actually meaning ceding one's rights. But onward. Member worlds were left to manage their own governance in accordance with their own traditions and local laws, so long as the general requirements of membership were met. This is similar to how the member states of the European Union are bound together today, and we can see how well that works, which is to say, not very well at all. And here comes the gotcha. However, the Federation laws did grant the government, the United Federation of Planets, emergency authority to override local governance and declare martial law on a member's territory. That is extremely scary. And interestingly, the logo of the United Federation of Planets is very similar to that of today's United Nations. And given how utterly useless and how utterly corrupt the ideology of the United Nations has become, I would not be hopeful for the United Federation of Planets to be much different. And oh, by the way, Earth now has one central government, which runs the entire planet. Let that unmitigated probability of disaster sink in. Moving on, what about marriage in the future Federation? We do see that some people choose a more traditional marriage, as in the episode Balance of Terror. So we know that marriage is not banned. And some people would still see what even today is considered old-fashioned or maybe quaint. And it's probably carried to an extreme in that future. The Enterprise, and probably many other starships, has a chapel, though it's probably interfaith, meaning worship whatever god your little heart's desires, maybe? Since the great bird had no use for religion, I more strongly suspect that this is the case. So the chapel is probably little more than a nod to tradition, where many a ship, especially warships, contained a chapel once upon a time. No mention of Christian churches is made pretty much anywhere in any Star Trek episode or book of which I'm aware. If you know of any, let me know. So I think we can see that Roddenberry's distaste for Christianity won out in all Star Trek timelines. Next, we have the Vulcan belief of idic, or infinite diversity from infinite combinations, essentially a component of Vulcan belief in logic in living, in which there is no room for monotheism, if indeed any theism at all. And since Vulcan influence in Earth affairs is heavy after first contact, I think it's safe to assume Idic is becoming the prevalent belief system on Earth, minus the logical aspect, since Vulcans considered humans to be highly illogical. It seems that there is no place on an enlightened Earth for such foolishness as the gospel. Now, what about finances in the future? In Star Trek, The Voyage Home, this exchange between Kirk and Dr. Gillian Taylor after pizza and beer, where Taylor and Kirk discuss 23rd century money, or the lack thereof. Don't tell me you don't use money in the 23rd century, to which Kirk responds, well, we don't. Of course, after that, Taylor then has to pay the restaurant bill. Then there is Picard having to explain in Star Trek The Next Generation on different occasions that the pursuit of wealth is no longer a thing on Earth. We see an example of this in First Contact and in the episode of Next Gen entitled The Neutral Zone. In Neutral Zone, 3 humans are awakened from cryosleep, one of whom was wealthy in the 21st century, and Picard has to explain to him that there is no such thing as wealth, and therefore all of his money is, gone. Now, what does the lack of a pursuit of money mean to Picard? It means that we as humans strive to better ourselves, as he told Lily Sloan in Star Trek First Contact. As if we don't do that at all now. Really. Amongst the citizens of the United Federation of Planets, there seems to be a complete disdain of the pursuit of wealth anywhere in the Star Trek universe. And the only species in the Trek universe who pursue wealth, the Ferengi, are treated as disgusting little creatures for their pursuit of money. Yet ironically, most of the cast and showrunners would be considered financially well off by today's standards. Perhaps they don't really believe what they are spouting? I don't know. I can't speak to what's in their mind or hearts, but it does seem to be somewhat elitist. So we've had a brief look at life ideology, or lack of religion, if you will, the lack of pursuit of money, replaced by what appears to be an even broader pursuit of self than we have even today. What about the overall financial system? Scotty says in Undiscovered Country that he had just bought a boat. And in Star Trek Generations, Kirk refers to having owned a ranch. And in Deep Space Nine, Benjamin Sisko's father owned a Cajun restaurant in New Orleans. Harcourt Fenton Mudd is always buying and selling around the galaxy, whether it be fake patents, stolen technology plans, and reselling them to people he doesn't have a right to resell them to, or in essence, selling women to lonely settlers. The original series episodes Mudd's Women and I Mudd. And then there's Cyrano Jones, who sold everything from Saurian Glowwater to Tribbles, the trouble with Tribbles, for which the barkeep on K7 bargained in credits. How is this possible if there is no longer money? We are told that in the Trek universe, at least in the Federation and Starfleet, we don't know what it's really like outside of that, there is a system called credits. Sisko talks about being homesick during his early academy days and of using up his weekly allotment of transporter credits to return to New Orleans. What are transporter credits? In the TOS episode Cat's Paw, DeSalle used the phrase credits to Navy beans, essentially a Star Trek variant of the old phrase dollars to donuts. Again, we have the phrase credits. So it looks like we have some kind of a system of credits, but what precisely are these credits? Is it some kind of universal basic income? Or is it something worse, such as China's nefarious social credit system, which so many socialists today are quick to praise up? Is it an everyone gets the same number of credits scheme? Would that even work? Not likely, human nature being what it is. We see this with Cyrano Jones and Harry Mudd. But did you notice? Everyone who barters or buys, sells, and in some way acquires is considered a lowlife or treated as a lowlife, such as the Ferengi or interstellar traders. And yet we see people owning ranches, restaurants, cars, etc. How does that work if no one has money and gets a basic income of credits? How do you buy a house, a condo, or say, a motorcycle? See Kirk in Star Trek, the 2009 reboot. Does the government actually own it all? That sounds like you'll own nothing and be happy. Sounds like, overall, an extremely socialist, Marxist type of system to me, or just as bad, some nightmare variant of something dreamed up by a Klaus Schwab or his type. Since you can't buy it, and there's going to be a limited supply, and the supply of houses and land on Earth is very finite, that leaves marching down to some government office to talk to some apparatchik to get your name on some long list after filling out dozens of documents in quadruplicate. And let's face it, the probability of getting the exact whatever it is you want is pretty minimal, after all, supply chain and supply and demand. And everyone is supposed to be happy with that and carrying on bettering themselves while they wait? Yeah, I can see that working out, human nature being what it is, no matter what Picard says and no matter how many other alien species we run into, if they even actually exist. And there are always the privileged few who can go to the head of the list, military, government, Starfleet officers, etc. The utopian system never, ever works out well anywhere, and the reason is simple: human nature, of which a major component is greed and self-centeredness. All you have to do is look at the trial balloon of a universal basic income system in Finland, which failed, by the way, in order to see human nature at work. So in short, the system in Star Trek is little more than a repackaged socialist Marxist protocol made to look inviting by changing some of the wording, tweaking things, and throwing in the "we now know we are not alone in the universe and they came to help us" mantra to make it look good. I'm sorry, but I'd much rather work for my living and be able to get ahead from my working for my living, maybe buy a house and own it myself. What a concept. Buy a car and or a motorcycle and own it myself. Again, what a concept. The government, even an interstellar one, can keep its damn dirty paws off, as Taylor said in Planet of the Apes. It's mine, not yours. But here's the closing question to ponder. What happens to those who, even after the Vulcans show up at first contact, refuse to go along with this view of Utopia? And there always will be those who will not go along with it. What about those who refuse to leave their Christian faith in the dust to adopt Idic? And what about those who continue to trade among themselves with money, or barter by trading odds and ends of goods? Human nature being what it is, this absolutely will happen, no matter what Roddenberry dreamed up. I have a picture in my mind of what would happen based on past socialist experiments, and it isn't a pretty one. They're called re-education camps, and when those don't work, will people be sent to penal colonies, resettled somewhere, or worse, psychiatric prison planets? exiled from Earth to some dark, distant part of the galaxy where they'll be forgotten about. Think about it. But when you think about it, you need to take human nature into account when you do. To me, the whole scenario sounds like some nightmare initiated by something like the World Economic Forum and all of its sycophants. Flame on.